Commence primary ignition.
I'm just not the hero type, clearly.
What a piece of junk.
Enterprise, this is the captain.
I got a bad feeling about this.
It's all part of the plan.
Engage.
Welcome back to Podcast 2 for 1. I'm your host, Donovan Thompson, with my co-host,
Daniel Wingfield.
In today's episode 155 of Podcast 2 for 1, youtube.com/2for1 studios, the best place to consume the content. And if you haven't noticed yet, we are greeted by a very special guest, Jason Miller. Jason?
Hey, thank you for having me.
Yeah, of course. If you guys were, small finger claps. Our listeners remember, I'm not sure quite when it was, a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, we had Jason on to talk Echo Boomers. Jason, I believe you're a writer. You're also a producer on that as well.
Yep.
And we had a lot of great insight onto that film. And today we're talking about The Last of Us on HBO Max. Before we get into that, if you didn't know, and most people probably don't, we are sponsored by Kapow Comics, located at 4047 East Kill Avenue in Sherwood, Arkansas, that they have comic books, collectibles, graphic novels, and of course, special guest appearances throughout the year.
Kapow.
That's like the thing we do, Jason. We kapow at the end of our little spiel there.
Yeah.
Episode 155. We're talking The Last of Us. Craig Mazin is the showrunner of this. Him and Neil Druckmann, the creator or one of the co-creators of The Last of Us franchise from Naughty Dog for Sony PlayStation. And before we get into like the nitty gritty of the show, I kind of want to get your guys' initial general impressions of the show, and then also your relationship to the game that it's based off of. And then we can, from there, we can kind of go down further deep into the rabbit hole. And I want to start with you, Jason. What's your take on both the game and then also this show as a whole?
Sure. Well, I mean, it's to me, it's one of the greatest games I've ever played. I wouldn't say like I'm the biggest gamer, but I've certainly, I'm certainly a gamer, and I definitely thought like, and a lot of what they do at Naughty Dog, not just with that, but with the Uncharted series, everything, they are a cut above so many other people. And Last of Us was such an incredible experience. Like it was so cinematic already. When I heard that they were doing an adaptation, like it's like, what can they do? That's going to be so challenging to match or top what they've already done in the game, because the game is already so well performed, well written, and well directed. How is this going to turn out? I was very pleased. I think they did it the right way for sure. They went about it in the right way of knowing what to carry over from the game, what to change, what to explore deeper. So I was very pleased with that. I'm also I'm a huge fan of part 2 as well. Part 2 is really where I think it solidified for me just how incredible storytellers Neil is and his team. So that's my take on the game. I will say, like, I'm fairly new to it in that I didn't have a PS3, so I got a PS4 like I'm gonna say like 4 or 5 years ago, and I kind of played catch up, and so I came upon The Last of Us because it was like I was doing research. I'm like, well, what's the best games? What are the ones that I need to play that are like, the top games? And everything on like all the Google searches, everything kept popping up. Last of Us #1, Last of Us #1. So I was like, okay, I got to play this Last of Us game, and I did. And incredible game.
Awesome. Daniel?
I'm kind of from the other side of the pond on this one. I'm a big gamer. I've been gaming most of my life, but I was always an Xbox kid just because that's what we always had. And so I've never played The Last of Us series. And I've played a little bit of Uncharted, which is the previous games of that studio of Naughty Dog. And I knew always, like, even, I do hope to at some point get a PS5 and kind of play through some backlog. And even now I don't know if The Last of Us will be a game I play too much of. It's just not my kind of game. Is the game where I get the freedom to tell whatever story I want, not where someone's telling me a story. Like that kind of clashes with what my gaming itch is. And so it's always been a game where like it is lauded. It's one of the most lauded and awarded and praised games of all time, right? And so I think there's always been part of me that was a little bit like, whatever, kind of like, not wanting to like the popular thing that I can't play. So going into the show, I knew kind of the twist ending of the first game, and I knew kind of what things happened in the second game. So, I was going into it really even believing that the TV show would actually be the preferable way for me to consume this story versus a game. Like, just tell me the story in a movie. Don't make me play it in between the cutscenes, if the cutscenes are that good. And so it's like, I was excited about this show. A lot of that was because Craig Mazin, who did Chernobyl right before this, was helming it, and I really loved Chernobyl. And so I thought, it's in good hands, and I knew the kind of acting power they were putting behind it. And I would say, like, just general thoughts about the show, I think it was really, really good. I think it's hard to argue with any part of the production or the acting. Most of the writing had much, if any, flaws in it. I do think that there are some things that sometimes sometimes the show felt like it was a show for people that had played the game, and sometimes it felt like it wasn't. And I think sometimes too often felt like, well, maybe that had worked better if I'd played the game. That change that they did, or this change in, like, just I think there were some issues from the season as a whole with pacing, just in terms of, like, we'd get going with momentum and then it felt like we lost it and we dropped it to go over here. And while over here was great, it felt like a kind of a jerking me around in terms of, like, what to expect from the show. So yeah, I think there's a lot to discuss, because I think, like I said, I think they did so much of it perfect. But yeah, and I think even, like, things that I didn't necessarily connect with, that may just be me things, you know what I mean? So it's like, it's very subjective whether these are flaws or at all.
Yeah, I would say that, to your point about the game, it is definitely that kind of game that it's, walking you through a story. So, you kind of, I kind of learned to, like, adjust to the game that I'm playing. If it's, if that's the kind of, if you're wanting a game that's going to give you a lot of open world freedom, it's not that. It's very much guiding you through that. But I will say that part 2 takes that point and uses it in a way that I think is what makes that game highly effective. If you're open to it, if you're open to what it's going to do to you, it's going to make you do some things. And that, I think, is one of the interesting things about part 2. And one of the things I'm interested to see in season 2 and 3, as they start adapting part 2, how are they going to take that integrity of the playability of part 2 and translate that into the narrative format on TV? It'll be interesting to see. But
very interesting. We've already heard confirmed that the Last of Us Part 2 will be more than one season of television. Craig Mazin has confirmed. So that to me sounds promising, because I know that's a very complex story.
Yeah, for sure.
And from what I understand, and you can maybe confirm this, Jason, it's almost twice or 3 times longer than the first game.
Yeah, it is, and it's it's very emotionally complex, and it's like I said, I think the playability of part 2 is what makes it so interesting, because you don't have those choices. You're forced to do things and play out that, these actions that you don't necessarily want to, and it's just interesting. I think it's less direct of there's a direct story. There's a direct the first game is very clearly, we're getting from point A to point B. This is our mission. And part 2, there is a mission, but it's kind of back and forth in dual storylines. And so it'll be interesting to see as they break it up into 2 seasons, where they divide it. And if they structure it one way, how are they going to keep the momentum going and keep that sense of direction going, versus if they structured another way. But yeah, we're getting into the future before we even talked about the present.
No, you're fine. It's interesting. For me, I love games in general, but I think I'm the opposite of Daniel, where I like being on rails. I like being told a story. And I almost sometimes just rather watch a movie than play a game, you know. And my favorite video game series of all time is Uncharted, just because it combines the Indiana Jones aspects with like the very cinematic, very on rails kind of gameplay that I personally love. So you would think that The Last of Us would be my favorite thing of all time. And although I do enjoy the game and I can sit back and look at it on a technical level and be like, man, these are incredible, it's never connected with me the same way that Uncharted has. Maybe that's just a genre thing. It's not action adventure, blockbuster. It's more stealth, you know, that kind of stuff. But I can appreciate it. And I played it on the first initial HD upgrade for PS4. And then I replayed it again last fall as the PS5 remaster, just to kind of prep for this show. And funny enough, Daniel, you know, probably all three of us have heard of Script Notes, so we're probably all pretty familiar with Craig Mazin and John August. So Craig Mazin has at least been in my life for 10 plus years, it feels like, as being part of the ECA, you know, film crew down there. And just for hearing that as a suggestion from the teacher. So seeing Craig and listening to him all these years, he gets Chernobyl and ends up becoming Emmy nominated and an Emmy winner. And then going on to this, it was like, I felt like just from those things that it was in good hands. And me and Kimley actually just started Chernobyl for the first time 2 nights ago. And because of the show ending, and we're in love with it. And I was afraid she wouldn't like it just because of the type of show it is, but she loves it probably more than I do. But watching, and same thing with The Last of Us, you know, I knew it was based off a game, and I knew all the plot beats. I just finished the game again. And I didn't know this would be kind of her kind of thing. And because she doesn't really like zombies or, you know, that kind of stuff. She likes more thrillers and like, you know, kind of true crime kind of stuff. And she also really loved it as well. And she was kind of like, hey, it's Sunday, it's Last of Us tonight. And I'm like, that's nice. That's nice that, you know, she's the one that's pushing me to get to the show. But I thought they did a great job adapting it. I would go as far as to say it's probably the best video game adaptation I've ever seen, just in terms of like, it's 1-to-1 in a lot of places, but it also expands a lot of moments or changes moments for, you know, not just to change them, but to like add something or to kind of dive into a particular beat that wasn't there in the games. Because that's the thing about, you know, I think the praise of that first game was, yes, it's like cinematic and it's well directed and all these things. But I think actually the story was a little held back by the gameplay. I was kind of imagining that it would be better in a form like this. And me and Daniel had one podcast about 8 weeks ago now about the first episode of the show, and we haven't talked about it since. And one of the questions we kind of kept bringing up was, what's the best way to consume The Last of Us now? Is it, and also real quick, Jason, I haven't played Last of Us Part 2. Like, I've been dying to play it since it came out. I just, for some reason, I've owned it for 2.5 years.
Yeah,
I own it. I've been like dying to play it, but I just keep holding myself off for whatever reason. But I told Kimley the other day, like, I'm going to play it here in the next couple of weeks or a couple of months. I'm going to know the story before you, and I'm going to tease you all the time. You get to wait 2 years for the show to come out. But a question we posed at the beginning of this 8 weeks ago, me and Daniel, was, what's the best way to consume The Last of Us? Is it to play this game that's roughly, you know, 12 to 15 hours, maybe 16, 17 with the Left Behind DLC, which we'll get into? Or is it to watch this long TV show, which is also roughly 9-10 hours? So what do you got? What do you think about that, Jason? What's the best way to consume the story of The Last of Us now that we've seen the whole season?
That's a good question. That's a good question. And I think it just depends on, you know, kind of what you like. I think they are 1-to-1 in terms of the quality of, you know, everything that, you know, you want from a good story, as far as like, you know, well written, well performed, you know, both have great actors. You know, Troy Baker and Ashley Johnson in the game do fantastic jobs, and the performance capture is so great that it. Yeah.
Shout out to their cameos in the TV show.
Oh yeah.
I didn't realize either one of them were who they were till after each episode. But then once I did, I was like, oh wow, and they were great as their characters, both of them.
Yeah, the score of the game is great, which they use in the show. And so it really is 1-to-1. I think it just kind of depends on, honestly, you know, again, like me being kind of a casual gamer, I think back on The Last of Us, and it's been a minute since I've played it. It was always kind of the story that I was always drawn to. And I I don't remember much about the gameplay. Like
Mm.
if I'm just thinking about gameplay and the enjoyability of just running around and shooting things, was The Last of Us the best experience as a game I've ever had? I don't really remember. I don't think so. Like lately I've been playing Breath of the Wild a lot.
Mhm. The opposite.
That's
of
a
Last
game
of Us.
to me.
Yeah.
That's the kind of game where like you can do whatever you want. You can play it however you want. There's all these like sort of like gimmicks that you have throughout the game that are just fun quests to do and see how many of these things you can collect or whatever.
Mhm.
That's cool. That's fun gameplay for me. I really enjoy that kind of thing. It's a very different experience than playing something like Last of Us,
I ask-
where
Yeah, I just want to ask you guys a question, because as people that play the game, so for me at the end of the season, and this kind of ties into the question of what's better version of consuming the story, I felt like we got to the end too quick this season. I kind of felt like it kind of felt like Joel and Ellie's relationship felt a little rushed, or a little bit like I wanted another episode or two potentially of just them surviving or growing together, and maybe, I don't know, see some more zombies, because I think we saw like all of 4 this season. And like I just think for me, and part of it, I know what the ending's going to be, but like I guess like where we ended even the penultimate episode, right, which was them escaping the cannibals, right? Was that the end of that? Was that the episode?
It's escaping the hospital.
The end of the penultimate. So the episode before the
penultimate. Yeah.
Eighth episode. That was at them being rescued. Or she gets away from the cannibals, right? Like that's that. Fantastic episode. But I think even then I started feeling nervous, because I was like, man, it feels like there's a lot of things to do in this last episode. And that moment that I was already aware of feels like such a big moment. It needs half of the runtime to do it, just kind of thing. So I was honestly, maybe we'll get like an hour and a half episode, because the first episode was an hour and a half, and so maybe we'll get this like feature length episode, and they'll do it, and then we got it, and like it hits all the notes, everything's there, but I felt like, I don't know. I think even just like Joel's decision to go, murder hobo on everyone, I get it. And I get like that we've like, Ellie's his surrogate daughter, but I don't know. I guess I just wanted at least one more moment before all that, where we're seeing him be even more protective, or like, you know what I mean? I thought we could have taken our time a little bit to get there, and I think it would have made it feel a little more earned. Did y'all feel any of that?
It does feel like, and I agree. And I actually was thinking the same thing at the end of that second to last episode, where it was like, they're really gonna, like, I knew narratively they could fit it in, but I was thinking like, how much are they gonna, lose to? Of course, they took out like the whole, Donovan, if you remember there was like a whole tunnel sequence, I believe, through Salt Lake, they took out. So they carved a lot out to get straight to that hospital. But yeah, I do see what you mean. And like going into season 2, that's one thing where I'm feeling like I am very interested to see how they structure it and how they, play things out, because I do want to go into season 2 and the major events of season 2, seeing that relationship grow more complex and deeper, and Ellie and Joel eventually develop this conflicted father-daughter kind of relationship. They've got there's a lot more for them to do with that before the major events of season 2 start playing out. And yeah, there is that. I am very curious to see how that, and kind of to your point, like it does feel like they might have gotten to that last episode a little too quickly. They could have, or not even that. I don't even think it needed another episode. I do think if that last episode had been an hour and a half, and there was just a bit more kind of build up to Joel's decision to take everybody out, that weighed on him a little bit more, or something like that.
Well,
Or even like if that was set up in the penultimate episode,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
Joel's decision was carried out in the last episode. That way we had like a whole week to let that sort of fester before we saw what he did.
Well, we're kind of
Um,
running into, I think, one of my biggest criticisms of the first game. One of to me, before I played the first game, I kept hearing like the ending, the ending, the ending. The ending's the most important part. This thing is going to wreck you. It's awesome, blah, blah, blah. And part of it may have been just that kind of build up and like expecting something massive. Emotionally, yes, it is. It hits a lot of notes, right? Joel makes a decision to go save his new daughter, right? And I think just like the game, I think I felt in the minority this way in the game. I always kind of felt like it felt anticlimactic in the game. Like, yeah, you are controlling a character, you're going and you are killing people, but just the way it's structured and presented felt ungame-like to me. It felt kind of more tame. I felt the same way in this show. And one of the first things I did after the show aired, I went online, and people that it seemed like who were just general watchers were like, wow, that was kind of anticlimactic. Like it didn't hit like it should have hit.
yeah.
And I was like, this is how I felt when I played the game X amount of years ago. Like I was the only person that felt this way playing the game. And
Yeah, well,
I feel that way, Daniel.
well, it's
I feel like
Yeah.
there's
Right.
they got there a little too no, I'm sorry. They got there a little too early with the previous episode, and then you have the opening where Joel kind of the last episode where Joel confesses that he almost killed himself. And I think you almost kind of save the, I got you, baby girl. You kind of save that for the after the saving, because he doesn't save her, in the
No, he doesn't,
penultimate, right? He's just stumbling upon this new scene that he's this new version of her he's found after she's killed this guy. And it's I think also part of the issue is something that Daniel was talking about too, where we had 2 whole episodes. While fantastic, we had the Left Behind DLC episode that it's a whole flashback for Ellie, which I think is great. We also had the episode 3, which is also fantastic, and I suspect will be nominated for an Emmy at some point in the next year, where we talk about I can't think of their names.
Bill and
Frank.
Ted.
Frank, yeah.
Frank.
Okay,
Frank.
yeah, Frank. And so
Bill and Ted.
it also just Bill and Ted. It just goes completely off the rails narratively there, and it's giving you texture and context for the universe and all these kind of things, but it doesn't really push the narrative we've started the first episodes, which is really important when you're starting a brand new show for television.
Well, looking back on it now,
that's kind of my thesis on it.
Looking back on the episode now, it just feels like such an anomaly, like just such a side story that had nothing to do with any of the major plot points, or even just internal plot for characters. I felt like, again, like that felt like, honestly, that episode would be perfect as what the Sandman did. Did you watch the Sandman on Netflix?
I agree.
Jason? They had this full season, this overarching plot. It finishes, and then like 3 weeks later, they're like, "Here's a bonus episode." That's like kind of like a little bit. It wasn't
DLC.
directly connected to the plot of the first season. It was kind of side and kind of like a vignette or like smaller stories. And like that Nick Offerman episode, that felt like that would be perfect for that. Now, at the same time, maybe it wouldn't have won Emmys if it was like this kind of extra thing instead of a part of the main course. I don't know. But I agree, Donovan. And I think there is this thing of like, for one, I'm tired of the trend of like 3 episodes before the end of a season, an entire episode occurs in a flashback or in a different location with a different character right when you left the previous characters in a harrowing position. You know what I mean? Like that is becoming more of a pattern to me in TV. And I'm just like, it doesn't feel good as an audience member to be like, I can't wait to know what happens next week. And then within the first 10 minutes, realize nothing that happens this week has to do with any of the things I was anticipating or like looking forward to. You know what I mean? Yes, it's great character. And like, I honestly feel like the DLC episode, the episode with Ellie and her friend, to me, that almost feels like that could be setting up season 2 and 3 more than it has as much to do with season 1, because it's kind of setting up, I guess, some qualities of Ellie's character, like her past relationship experiences, which really get shoved into the forefront in the second game, right? And like, and so I just, to me, that even felt like we just lost a sense of urgency at that point. And then I think within the last 2 episodes, when they feel a little cramped, it is that like, well, we only had 9 episodes. I mean, a 10th doesn't seem, I mean, I'm sure you guys could have got it greenlit. I'm sure no one said, no, you can't have another episode. You know
they did
I
have
mean?
10 episodes. They did, to be fair. They just combined the first 2.
Well, that's because
after HBO was kind of like, this isn't working, or it isn't working as well as it could. So it was 10, and they changed that, you know, towards the end of production or before the show aired.
They could have also, and I wonder if they considered, I mean, I'm sure they did. You know, there was probably a lot of talk about where to put these episodes. You know, like the DLC episode could have been episode 2. It could have been a flashback.
You could have cut that into several episodes. You know,
but yeah, you know, I liked all the context and the texture that it provided. I loved episode 3. I thought it, you know, was incredible. And I think to your point earlier, Daniel, it was kind of there. I think there is a question of like, how much is there for people who's played the game, stuff like that. I think about like the ending being, you know, the emotional climax. I think a lot of that is kind of tying to the events that are going to come up in part 2. Because that you know, part 2 is really plays a huge role in the fact that Joel lies to Ellie at the end. That's a huge emotional aspect of how part 2 plays out. And I think that, like, you know, it is kind of like setting up a lot of conflict and a lot of that kind of stuff. And so if without being familiar with what comes next, I think a lot of people might look at it and go like, well, okay, you know, what happened here? Well, everything happened. Everything about these characters' lives just changed dramatically. We don't necessarily know how yet. We're not going to see the results of those actions yet, or just the lie itself. So I can see how it might feel anticlimactic if we're not thinking ahead to what it implies and what it actually means. And so, yeah, you know, I don't know how much of that they considered or thought about as far as like, you know, if we put the emphasis on this, are people going to kind of follow along, get it, or is it going to feel like we just, you know, kind of, like you said, it was anticlimactic.
Well, it's interesting because
it's a tricky thing to balance. I think.
Yeah, I feel like it's anticlimactic from an external plot perspective. It's not emotionally. I mean, it's very climactic emotionally. But I do think you're right, Donovan. There is this element of like, that's one place where I think maybe I wish they did change a little bit. Like, I don't know. Maybe we did need a big action sequence in the tunnels for the first 30 minutes of that episode and to feel a sense of accomplishment when they arrive. Like, I just felt like from the moment they arrived at the hospital, there was just this tone of everything's about to go to shit, even if you didn't know. That's what everything felt like. And so it didn't really feel like a twist what Joel did. It felt like the show was projecting or foreshadowing it the whole time from the moment they hit him in the head and stuff. And again, maybe that's just like the game, but I felt like for the purpose of the twist and even just the you know, the punch that the finale gives, it would be nicer if there was this like maybe more nicer exterior. They treat them nicer before they realize what's going on, or like, or I
think that's a really good point. I think you're right on the money. That hadn't occurred to me, but yeah, like the whole show is about them reaching this hospital. That needs to be the thing that, like, we've done it, we've made it, you know. Yeah, no, totally.
No, yeah. I mean, I think a big thing is just its pacing and structure in the way. I think you're 100% right, Daniel. It's not the internal, it's the external. And the thing is, when I was watching Joel gun these guys down, which he's more like Superman SWAT guy here than he is in the
Yeah.
entire show. Like he's just good, really good. He's good
Just
in the
one
show,
shot
but he's,
headers,
like, really
man. I
good
mean,
now.
yeah, he's just
Yeah.
perfect accuracy.
Which was cool. You know, I like that he's kind of turning on that killer instinct, that mode. He's just like, I'm not going to hear you talk. I'm not going to hear you plead. I got a mission to do. That's badass. But it is structure, and then how they where location wise he makes decisions. I think, like you said, it should have been a build up to like, we're at the hospital. Joel leaves the hospital and someone tells him then as he's leaving. You know what I'm saying? Like it's, you know, little things like that structurally change like the stakes also. I mean, you're not just like in a hot, like, you know, now Marlena's not telling you. I mean, that's the thing. They chose to do the flashback with Ellie, or with Ellie's mom and Marlena. So they wanted to give you that scene between Marlene and him. Like, I'm her new mother and you're her new daddy. And, you know, I'm this hurts me more than you. That's why that scene existed.
But
there's
I
way
don't
you
feel
could
like
have
that
had
scene.
that.
Well,
You
I'm
could
just
have
saying,
had
like,
that
I don't feel like
when he had the gun on her. You know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah,
you could
exactly.
always change these kind of things up to kind of build up this moment. And I think that they kind of just messed up a little bit in structure there at the end.
I mean, you're right. You're exactly right. I mean, I actually really liked that scene with Ellie's mom. I thought it was just well acted, and just like we kind of got some more zombie, and it was just kind of like it was tense, and it was harrowing, it was heartbreaking, it was all of that. But you're right, that whole scene just sets up that one line from her, and that line fell so flat just in the moment. You know what I mean? It just did not feel like a big line or a big deal. It just, you know, when she said to you, you're like, oh yeah, because her mom said you're the mom now. Okay. But you know, it wasn't like, it could have been, you're right, this kind of like I don't know, some kind of like really impactful at a climax of emotional moment kind of thing. And yeah, I think you're right, Donovan. It would have been nicer if like he actually leaves first, or something happens where like they're just trying to basically pretend, like, which I don't know why they wouldn't do this, where they would just lie to him until the surgery was over. Like that would just seem like just easiest option.
Donovan, you remember the game because you probably played it. Like, did it? He overhears it, right? That's how he learns it in the game, doesn't he?
I don't think Marlene or anything tells him. I think he overhears it or something like that, and like that kind of spurns him to go after them. You know, which have worked
better. I think. Here's the
I don't remember in the game how you arrive at the hospital. If you were knocked out and dragged there like they were in the game or the show, but I do think that might be the key. Like you were saying, Daniel, is like they needed to arrive there on their own will, and it feel like they've made it.
We the audience, because I do feel like that sense of like they accomplished, like
this was the point of the show,
yeah,
and we've accomplished it now.
Yeah, that's the moment where the audience member, the general audience, pauses the show and like, oh, this is fixing to end. We're fixing the credits. We're like, wait a minute, there's 30 more minutes left. What's going to happen? That's that moment, and then that's when you flip it on them, and then Joel has his one last mission, and then that's that's how you get there.
What they did is so much more direct, right? Like they arrive at the hospital, they get knocked out. The next scene is Joel being told what is about to happen, just straight up. We have to dissect her brain to get the cure. That's the only way. You know what I mean? It's not like, you know, it feels like, again, it feels like kind of like, well, this is done for time, like, or almost like it feels like it was rushed a little bit in terms, you know?
Yeah, it did feel like it was done for time. To be fair, I do think that they tried to write it in a way that Joel figures it out. She doesn't tell him that they're going to kill Ellie. She just mentions like the cordyceps.
He investigates.
Yeah, and he's like puts it together like, wait a minute, cordyceps grow in the brain. But again, like to your point, she didn't even have to tell him that much. You know,
they just say, hey, she's in surgery, she'll be out. It'll take a long time, but you know what? You'll get to meet her when she's out. All happy smiles. Here's a
right.
joke, you know?
And you know, it sounds maybe to the listener right now that the show has had some huge fault at the end, and I think it's weaker than it could have been compared to the overall thing, but the show is still hitting on a lot of cylinders in a lot of ways, and so it's a testament to that we're like talking about rearranging certain scenes at the end and just changing out certain pieces of dialogue. Like this is 9, essentially 10 episodes of television where they hit a lot of it really damn well. So kudos to them. We are nitpicking, but there's a last question here before we kind of get into some questions I have for you, Jason, about your upcoming projects. But something I kind of felt in the game space before the show, and I feel even more so now, was that Neil Druckmann, he's in a medium that he doesn't want to be in so much, right? Like they are pushing the gameplay and graphics, those kind of things. But I always kind of just had the impression that this guy wants to be in movies and TV. And now that he is, he's found this doorway through Craig Mazin, and he's on the end of the episodes, the behind the scenes stuff. I feel like, I wonder if he'll kind of live more in that kind of space. And then, but also B, do you guys think that Craig will have any influence on Last of Us Part 3? Like, we've heard reports that Neil had, he's had an outline or something for Part 3, or even potentially a prequel. But now I wonder if that will change with Craig coming in with his own ideas, and will he become a writer on the game? And it's it's wild because he's a big fan of the game, right? And because of that game, he wanted to make the show, and then he makes the show, he gets to make the game. It's like a chicken and egg.
He's gonna look at the outline and be like, well, this would work better in the show if you did it this way.
Exactly.
I don't know about that. I do know that Greg has specifically said they don't want to take the show beyond the game. And they said that they felt like that was the mistake Game of Thrones made, is getting ahead of itself, and they don't want to repeat that. And so I do wonder if that kind of informs us about Greg's mentality about how far he's gonna overstep or kind of get in between things.
Yeah, I know. I don't think that I'm sorry, Daniel. I don't think that they're going to do the Game of Thrones route where they kind of go over the source material. I do think, they're going to make a part 3. They're going to make a part 3 that 48 hours after part 2 come out because of the sales. Yeah. But now even more so, it's once you start having an IP touch other types of mediums, and it does as successful as this, now you have a critically acclaimed show and a critically acclaimed game. The merchandising alone is going to be huge. You're piggybacking also on Pedro Pascal being, the internet's daddy, as they've been saying lately, with the Mandalorian and Joel and Ellie. So it's true. I can see this now, a Sony boss coming in. Obviously it's Neil, you can do whatever you want. You guys are our cream of the crop, but you sure you don't have that Last of Us Part 3 story laying around? You know what I mean?
See what I see. I could totally see season. Who knows? Maybe it would be 4 of the Last of Us TV show being developed alongside of the game, the third game. That's, for sure.
I could too.
With how closely they are working together. To me, that's the way that Craig gets to not do what he said he wasn't going to do, but still kind of, kind of do it. I mean, who knows? I mean, at the same time, if you release the game and the show too close to each other, they might cannibalize each other's sales. There might be people who'd be like, well, I'd play the game, but I'd rather just watch the show, or vice versa.
Yeah. And the timing of that, of writing the show and the game. I mean, in terms of the show's going to be done infinitely faster than that game. And that game is going to be delayed 4 to 5 times before it ever comes out. You know what I'm saying? It's almost impossible.
But I guess
my hope is that they're working on it now.
I'm sure
secretly
there's a department at Naughty, there's at least a group of people that's all they do. But I think it's interesting because what I know of Game 2, it's a little bit similar to Game 1 or Season 1, where it finishes all of the plot arcs, but it doesn't leave the characters in a just satisfying, happy place.
Oh no, there's definitely.
It feels like you're leaving. There's a lot of loose ends, and you don't know what's going to happen with a lot of these characters. And maybe that's even the part where I'm so a little confused about exactly what The Last of Us is to Naughty Dog, because they're saying they kind of said we'll make another Last of Us if we. It's a little cliche or whatever, but are inspired by love to tell another story about love that's intrinsically true or something. And I think you do. Yeah, I agree. It's a little chuckly.
Well, I've seen that written 7 times for 7 different things. You know what I'm saying? You hit the money, you hit the head on the head.
Love can mean a lot of things. But anyway, it makes me wonder, even, so the episode, the redone version of Frank and Bill felt matched what they're talking, matched their, what they're saying about how they view that these games are and where they want to take them in the future. And so, I think I'm really curious just what how the Last of Us IP continues after 2, because is this a series where they're just going to leave? I mean, the games have been told it's just heartbreaking. You're just over and over, just punched in the gut with emotional after emotional thing. And like, but that's what it is. Like, that's what you're getting with The Last of Us. It's just kind of dire. And that's just the world. The TV show had that, but then it had opposite that at times. So I'm just curious, where does this IP go? And I don't know. It's very interesting.
What's the end game? I think
Exactly.
is like at the end of part 2. No, you're right. The characters are more broken than they were to start, and it's like, the thing about part 2 is like part 1 is about we can find a cure. Part 2 is not. It feels like in part 2 they've given up on that. There is no cure. There is no ending this. This is life now, and this is how we're going to survive it. And part 2 is very personal. It's a very personal, character-driven story. And at the end of it, the characters have learned a lot about themselves, and they're trying to get past some things, but they're all very broken. And it does kind of leave you wondering, like, well, what is part 3 going to be about? And at what point do we declare that the Last of Us franchise has reached its end? I don't know if there is one. I think they've gotten so deep into these complex human emotions that it's like life. There's no conclusion. There's no, grand
That's the thing.
finale.
There could be 7 more games, and each of those games has a whole new pair of characters, and they're tackling a new emotion that they're trying to explore.
I kind of expect them eventually
but
to jump ship to new characters. Like it's Last of Us, but not Joel and Ellie. Eventually, I mean, that seems inevitable eventually. Yeah, they
definitely have room to branch off in part 3. Part 2 is very polarizing. Obviously, a lot of people hated it. I've declared I love it. I'm in the camp of thinking it's one of the most brilliant games I've ever played.
Can't wait. I'm so ready to play it. I think just
I'll
see you guys later.
You gotta be ready for it. But like it'd be my hope is that they don't let the haters influence it too much, both season 2 and part 3. Like I hope that they stick to what they've established, because I do think that I think it's a vocal minority that really hates part 2.
I would say if you look at the sales, that seems very true, because it did very well.
Yeah, and so they could take part 3 in a lot of different directions. They could take the character of Abby and I'm sure there'd be like people crying in the streets about that, but I would be down for it. I loved Abby.
Sure.
I think she was a fantastic character. So yeah, I think they could definitely branch this off and just keep going. But I think that people need to kind of accept the fact that The Last of Us as a franchise is never going to give you a satisfying conclusion. It's always going to be digging into. There's not going to be a game or a show where they finally like, here's the cure and we're back to life and now we live in a utopia. It's not that story.
With The Last of Us, you just expect everything, every character, all of the world to be worse by the time whatever story is over. Just everything gets that's like it's like the anti-arc plot. It's like here's where it was and everything's bad or after.
I do like my happy endings, my Uncharted's. I think it's where, which sadly, it had a really poor adaptation last year or the year before last, and so
I didn't see that one.
I was really bummed about it. Yeah, I mean, I say watch everything just cause, but I mean, it's definitely not worth watching.
It didn't do
really.
like horrible, like critically, right? Like it wasn't panned.
I think there could be a sequel. I think it's the money's there for it.
Yeah.
It definitely had plans. I feel like they set out to do that just by the casting alone. By casting Tom Holland and Mark Wahlberg, they were saying like, we're going to start when these characters are young and we're going to keep this going for decades and let them age into their characters that we know from the game.
It didn't do poor financially, but it didn't do like amazing where we've already heard of the sequel announced, so like I think we're just in a small holding pattern. Well guys, it kind of feels like that, overall we really enjoyed the show this first season. We'll probably have to wait 2 years. I kind of suspect this might be like a House of Dragon, Last of Us, like alternating years kind of
thing. Which they should. I think they should take their time for the most part, because the story of part two. Part two is set years after part one, and Ellie is a young woman in that game. And that is important. So yeah,
Bella
I mean,
Ramsey is 19, which she doesn't look it. So
she is 19,
and
I
they made
think
her
that
look younger, and they did a great job. I mean, she feels
and
like
performance
a
too. I think she
13-year-old.
played young, and I
Mhm.
think that she's a very talented actress. She's going to transform before our eyes and be 20-year-old Ellie. But even so, I think if they give it enough time, let's wait. First of all, wait because the more time they wait on the show, that's more time they can also be developing part three, so they don't get ahead of themselves.
Sure.
And so take their time. I'm totally down with them taking their time.
Real quick, game wise, we are getting a Last of Us multiplayer game, which apparently has its own story structure and plot that takes place within the universe. So if you want more Last of Us, obviously you could play the first game, play the second game that has a lot of content and is critically acclaimed and considered one of the best games of all time. I've only seen like probably a couple minutes of gameplay. I've stayed away from it on purpose, and just technically in terms of animations and just a game, like what a game can do, like it looks like the best game I've ever seen in my life in terms of just choices of animation and like the randomness of the algorithm of like your hand touching things and that kind of stuff, little things that it's more aesthetic and bringing the life real world kind of thing. And also we have the upcoming multiplayer game supposedly in this fall.
That'll be interesting
Jason,
because it goes back to what we were talking about before about the gameplay aspect of the game, and it being an aspect of it that I don't even really remember that well. I remember the story, I don't remember the gameplay. But now I assume a multiplayer game is going to be all gameplay.
Yeah, I'm curious to what happens with it. Jason, we had you on, I said earlier in the podcast a couple of years back to talk Echo Boomers, and since that time, from just the little I've seen on Twitter, you've written and directed a movie called The Lot, and I think from what I understand, it played at, or at least it was judged or played at Dread Central in December of last year. So it's completed, it's out, or it's people can, or festivals.
We did get into it. Was like this little online fest. We kind of we kind of under the radar let it play on an online platform called Shockfest. But we're now kind of in we're in a little bit of a transition stage because we've gone back and we're trying to develop some of the marketing materials before we move forward with any more festival submissions.
Well, can you tell me what was the inception of this idea, and then when you shot it, and
sure,
just a little bit more about that real quick.
I wrote the original script, I think, even before we made Echo Boomers. I wanted a script in my back pocket that was my no budget script.
Sure.
And because I had a couple of projects that I was trying to get off the ground, they were all pretty big. And I just needed that no budget script. And so I wrote it, and for the longest time, I was kind of just keeping it to myself because I was just kind of figured, like, as soon as I have a little bit of resource and a little bit of money, I'm gonna go out and make this movie myself. Meanwhile, Seth who's the director of Echo Boomers and producer of some stuff that I've done, was kind of talking about the next project, what's the next thing we're going to do together and stuff like that, and he would kind of casually mention like, hey man, if you got something you want to make, let me know, I'll see what I can do to get my resources behind it. And I kind of would play it close to the chest because I didn't want to get into a situation where we started making The Lot bigger than it needed to be, and I ended up waiting another 2 years and not get to make it. Like, the whole point was to write something that was cheap enough that I could make pretty easily and on my own. But after a while, I finally started thinking like it wouldn't hurt to just see what Seth could come up with. I mean, he's got connections. And so I finally let him in on the script and let him see it, and he loved it. And it's like, yeah, man, let's get behind this thing. So he brought a little bit more money to it than I ever thought it would be made for, because I was going to make it for nothing. But it was still very low budget. We were still, in a very, very low budget bracket.
Well, there's also probably this fear, Jason, that when you have someone who says they can bring you resources, and you're like, okay, well, what's the first movie that has my name attached to it that's like more than a couple people might see this in terms of directing or writing? So it's like, also it's choosing that film, like that first movie, like how much of that influence? Okay, The Lot's the one that's going to be this independent first movie or whatever.
Yeah, and that's always kind of weighing on me, and I've recently tried to stop letting it weigh on me too much. I feel like I would overthink it a lot because I'm always thinking about that first feature. What I began to eventually start to pay attention to was that for every director that I loved that was coming out the gate with their first big thing, like I was a big Ari Aster fan. He comes out with Hereditary as his first feature and it's this huge hit. For every director like that, Robert Eggers doing The Witch and stuff like that. For all those directors, there's most of the directors that I really love. I haven't probably even seen their first feature, I think about like Denis Villeneuve, who's one of my favorite current working directors. I didn't become aware of him until Prisoners.
Sure.
And I've since seen like, Enemy and the one that was in the school that he did in Canada. But I haven't seen a lot of his other films, but he's got tons. He's got a whole filmography that predates that. And so you start to learn that like most successful directors, it takes time for them to kind of build up their credibility. So don't overthink that first feature, whatever it is, however you get to make it, whether it's big or small, I think, I started getting comfortable with the idea that I'm going to make The Lot. Hopefully it does well. Hopefully it does well enough. I don't think it's going to be, it might not be a game changer, but I will get that first film made and move on to the next one. So that was kind of my mentality once. And it was a fight internally to get to that mentality because I had to overcome this obsession with making that first feature, which I think is the thing that reason I haven't made a feature yet, was always just like battling that, like overthinking it, overthinking what that first feature was going to be instead of just going out and doing it. But we shot The Lot in Chicago because that's where the money came from, and that's Seth's connections are all up there. We shot it in November of 2021, I believe. 2021. So very cold and very, very intense and chaotic shoot, all night shoots in the middle of Chicago winter. So it was very rough, but we got it done. And we finished it, but like I said, now we're kind of in that point where we're realizing that, we need to get the marketing together. And part of that too is the title change. So it has been called The Lot. Going forward, it's here soon. Hopefully I'll be announcing a new title. I don't know what it is yet. So it's kind of hard to plug a movie that won't be called the thing that I'm calling it right now. But anybody who follows me on Twitter or any place like that, I'm going to be talking about it. So,
well, that's something that me and Daniel, we have our own projects going on and we have like tentative titles. And something we say all the time is like, well, this won't be the title because when someone comes in to either, if it ever gets made or something like that happens or someone buys a script, they're going to want to have a marketing team and make some dumb title that we don't approve of. And that's out of our hands. You know what I'm saying? Like that's kind of part of the game. I do want to ask, and this may be too candid of a question. One thing that me and Daniel, I think, have been doing with our recent projects is like trying to be really honest with ourselves. Like, okay, we're spending this amount of time on this, whatever this is. What's the goals with this particular script or project or whatever? And like, what's the real world goal? So like, I was going to ask you, what do you want to get out of releasing The Lot? Obviously you're getting one out of the gate. There's the idea of, get someone watching it and making it and giving you money for a new one. But what's the, this may be too kind of a question, but what's like, here's what my bare minimum, here's what I want to get out of making this first movie.
Well, I mean, you kind of answered it really what you just said. I mean, for me, artistic stuff aside, we can talk about it creatively and artistically, what I want to say and all that. But like, as far as a career, my goal really is to, my hope, my dream is to be noticed by somebody who, can kind of get me beyond, this stage, regardless of whether or not the movie's financially successful or becomes a huge hit or whatever. I'm always intrigued by that. Like I love the stories of, and I don't know if this will ever happen to me or not, but like, we got Evil Dead Rise coming out here in a few weeks, and I'm really excited about that. That's directed by Lee Cronin, who directed a little movie called Hole in the Ground a few years ago, and I saw it. It was a fine little movie. You wouldn't necessarily think that this is a guy who can helm a Evil Dead movie from that, but Sam Raimi thought so. He sees it and says, I see what this guy's doing here. I think he'd be great to helm an Evil Dead movie, and then it's happening. That's a great situation for to me. I would love for somebody to watch The Lot and see. It's a slow burn movie. It's not for everybody. It has a particular style that I was going for. It might not be everybody's cup of tea. It might not be a huge hit. I want somebody though to say, I see what this Jason Miller guy's got going on as a director, as his vision, what he wants to do, and I've got a project that I think he'll be perfect for. That's a wonder. That would be a great situation. But beyond that is, if I don't get that, I get to keep working with the people that I'm working with now, and that's great too.
That's awesome.
I've already actually optioned a script with Seth that we're working on, and everyone's interested in that. And we don't even know what the outcome of The Lot is, but they're down for it from a creative standpoint. So that feels very good. To have awesome. That kind of support.
Well, I mean, I think I'm going to speak for Daniel here. I think, whenever you're ready, or when the movie comes out in whatever form that may be, we would love to have you back on, like we did with Echo Boomers, to talk about the process more and just kind of, where your headspace at was making it. And, now that you've lived with it and had the movie come out, your experience with that as well. But I really appreciate you coming on talking about The Last of Us. And it's always a treat talking to you. And, I had a great time.
Yeah, me too. Loved it.
Me too.
Daniel, how can our listeners write into us?
Listeners, you can write into bit.ly/241mail and let us know what you thought of the first season of The Last of Us. Were you, kind of in our boat where we kind of felt there was some anticlimactic that's a word, to the end of the season, or did you, did it knock your socks off? Let us know. bit.ly/241mail.
Need to be like a radio announcer, Daniel. Jason, how can our listeners find you on Twitter? What's your Twitter handle, or any other social media platforms?
Jason Miller Film is my Twitter handle, and Twitter is mostly where I'm. Twitter is where I like to be. I don't have any followers or anything, but I enjoy being on Twitter more so than like Instagram. I don't even know what my handle is on Instagram, but if you find me on Twitter, I got a link tree there, so you can find me on all the other social platforms most of which I don't use. So
perfect.
But it's
we'll throw that in the description below and on when this video goes live later today or whenever. But if you can't up our Bitly, you can always write us in the comment section below. Again, youtube.com/241studios. It is the best place to consume the content. I believe Daniel and I don't really know yet. We might be talking about Shazam. We probably will talk about Mandalorian next weekend. We always had that to look forward to. Jason, it's really again, thank you so much for being on here, taking the time out of your schedule and talking to us. And we can't wait to talk to you again about whatever. One thing I think it'd be great to do with you, just talking to you about this. One thing we do with Bruce Hutchinson, we still have him come on and do script breakdowns with us. We watch a movie, we break it down structurally, and those are always just fun. Just because I think we learn a lot, and we can also kind of keep us sharp a little bit about movies in general. And I think, we would love to have you on one of those, or just us three, and you get to pick a movie, and we'll break it down and and learn about it together.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that.
Yeah. So one thing we do here, Jason, that you probably remember, is our little sign off here. So my name is Donovan Thompson.
I am Daniel Wingfield.
I am Jason Miller.
And we have spoken.